Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, today we're sort of peeling back the curtain on one of history's, well, most terrifying economic collapses, the Great Depression, but we're coming at it from a really interesting, almost personal angle. We've been digging into a stack of sources that explore this staggering paradox. What happens when the most powerful empire in the world, one that kind of operates invisibly through money, finds its very foundation tied to the health of just one person? Yeah, these sources, they take us back to 1931. They zero in on the governor of the Bank of England, a hugely powerful figure. They actually called him the Lord of Invisible Empire. And this man announced he was stepping back. Not over policy, not over market stuff, but because of nervous collapse, just sheer exhaustion. So was this just, office news about a stressed exec, or was it something bigger, like a warning sign for, well, the whole system?
That's exactly the mission today. We usually look at economic crises through, hard numbers, GDP, balance sheets, rates. We think, okay, the problem is a lack of money or maybe a lack of gold. But what if the real story, the deeper psychological truth, is that a global crisis is basically just a contagious lack of trust? We're trying to cut through the jargon here, get to how human emotion really drives global stability or instability.
Okay, let's put a name to this. We're talking about Montagu Norman, governor of the Bank of England then. He was like the face of the global financial world. And our first thought, probably yours too, listener, is that these people holding the money keys are, cold steel, detached,
Yep.
rational. It just seems kind of wild that one guy's burnout could actually register on the global fear index.
And yet that's exactly what these sources lay out. Norman's very public health issue, it became a kind of spark for this massive global fear. Now, the system was already creaking under huge stress, but the moment the gatekeeper, the guy who symbolized strength, showed that he was frail, well, that frailty just got magnified across the entire structure.
Okay, so walk us through that chain reaction. What did his personal fragility actually set off, like immediately?
Well, the sources map it out pretty clearly. It was a disastrous domino effect. Remember, earlier that year, a huge bank in Austria, Creditanstalt, had already collapsed. That shook confidence. Then, when Norman's exhaustion became public knowledge, it just poured fuel on that fire. It triggered these huge panicked waves of capital withdrawal, especially from Germany, which was already deep in debt.
Right. And when Germany starts shaking, London feels the tremors immediately, doesn't it? As the heart of global finance.
Exactly. London was fighting tooth and nail to keep the gold standard afloat with all this money flying out. And the impact wasn't just in fancy bank offices. It hit the streets fast. Those dry numbers turned into real human suffering. Mass unemployment spreading like wildfire in industrial cities. You started seeing, shanty towns, Kunhatdam popping up in cities as people lost everything. And at the same time, the sources point out, you see political extremism starting to gain traction. It fills that vacuum when economic security just vanishes.
That jump from one man's health problem to a global tragedy, that's where it gets really fascinating, I think. The sources talk about the communication mechanism. It wasn't just that he was ill, it was the signal it sent out. Right?
Totally. A single downbeat letter, or maybe a vague health update, it could set fear off, like wind through dry straw, as one source puts it. The governor's personal exhaustion became this sort of magnifying mirror, just reflecting and amplifying the public's own deep, simmering unease. The whole system was brittle, sure, but that emotional signal, that was the accelerant. Think about the analogy the sources use, the big four central bank governors, UK, US, Germany, France. They were seen as the main gears in the global machine. Each one kind of embodied their nation's stability. So when the central gear, Norman, the most powerful one, sputtered, well, the whole machine just seized up. The psychological blow was instant.
Okay, so let's move from the story to the core lesson here. The sources suggest that to really get why these crises happen, we need to look at three interlocking layers, and it's not about balance sheets.
Yeah, the first layer is crowd psychology. We have to acknowledge that basic cycle of greed and fear. Economic fevers, those periods of wild optimism, they often run longer than anyone thinks, defying logic.
Yeah.
Until some shock hits. And bam, the psychology flips, almost overnight. And the key insight here, money, when you strip away the paper and metal, it goes back to its real essence. Trust. Kin, as some sources frame it. Currency is basically a social IOU. It works because we trust it before we think about gold or paper.
Wait a second, if money is just crystallized trust, how does that explain something like hyperinflation? When a currency is tanking but people weirdly still use it for daily stuff, isn't it just a tool then?
That's a really sharp potion. Even in crazy hyperinflation, there's this tiny residual utility that acts like a kind of broken trust. It's like The trust that someone else will probably accept this worthless thing tomorrow, even if the value is plummeting. But what our sources are digging into here is the systemic crisis, like 1931. That's where trust in the underlying promise of the whole system, the promise the government or bank will actually be good for it, just evaporates. When that collective confidence shatters, even the utility of the currency breaks down. People go back to barter or holding physical stuff.
Yeah.
The 1930s, that was a crisis of faith in the global rules themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. And it leads perfectly into the second layer you mentioned, institutional structure. At that time, the big rule book was the gold standard, and that was supposed to be the guarantee of discipline, right? Governments couldn't just print money wildly.
Exactly. Discipline is crucial. But the sources argue that discipline without any flexibility, it ends up being a straitjacket, bow. It basically suffocates the economy right when it needs room to breathe, maybe expand a little. The gold standard, for all its good intentions, proved way too rigid when that global stress test hit.
So the big takeaway rule here is good institutions have to be elastic. Anheuer? Is that it? They need principles, sure, to stop people going wild, keep leaders in check, but they also need that wiggle room, that flexibility to step in and save the day when a crisis inevitably hits. If the rules are too tight, they actually make the collapse worse by stopping sensible emergency action.
Precisely. And that idea of elasticity links straight to the third layer, the gatekeeper's responsibility. Central banks, as the sources put it, hold this incredible privilege of printing trust, which implies that leading an economy isn't just about managing money. It's fundamentally about leading collective emotion, the skill of pricing fear, knowing when to act, how much to reveal. That can be just as vital as knowing where to set interest rates.
Okay, but that raises a huge question about speed. If fear is like wildfire, how can any institution possibly manage it in time?
Yeah, that's critical. The sources stress this core point. The speed of information, even with our 24/7 news cycle today, is still slower than the speed of emotional contagion. Fear just travels faster than facts. Always has. So institutions need to master what sources call soft breaking, fandmum. That means timely transparency, yes, but also truthful communication and interventions that are big enough and timed well enough to reassure people without causing more panic. It's a really fine line. And Norman's collapse, it was partly a failure of that soft breaking. The symbol of stability couldn't project confidence right when it was most needed.
Okay, so the lesson from the Depression seems to be that mastering finance really means mastering the architecture of trust and emotion. So, bringing it back, what does this mean for you listening? You're probably not running the Bank of England. But the sources argue these same principles apply because, well, each of us runs our own bank of trust, personally, professionally, in our families. We've pulled out 4 kind of core practices from this history.
Right. Let's start with managing your internal machinery. Practice 1 is about managing emotional interest rates. We often just let our emotions dictate things, but try treating them like internal interest rates you can consciously adjust. So when you're feeling really excited, euphoric, maybe things are booming personally or professionally, that's when you should deliberately increase your internal interest rate of caution. Because let's be honest, that's often when we make our dumbest mistakes.
Okay, that's a great preventative tip. But what about the flip side? When you're feeling down, pessimistic, maybe facing a setback.
Then you got to do the reverse. You need to consciously lower your interest rate of self-pitying discipline. Sometimes we use pessimism as an excuse to just freeze up, right? We suffocate ourselves with this overly harsh discipline. To get moving again, you need to create space, flexibility, forgiveness, just like a good central bank needs to inject liquidity in a crisis.
Okay, practice number 2. Diversifying your reserves. Nations used to hoard gold. What's the personal equivalent for being resilient? Don't just focus on money or liquid assets. Diversify your personal gold reserves into reserves of virtue.
Yeah, this is the stuff that, unlike cash, the sources call gold that doesn't lose value. Things like your knowledge, your skills, your compassion, your reputation, the strength of your relationships. These internal reserves, they're your buffer zone. They're what let you essentially exchange the panic notes of external chaos like a sudden job loss or a market crash for internal calm treasury bills. When your bank account takes a hit, your virtue reserve keeps your value, your standing, your ability to bounce back intact.
Number 3 sounds like it links back directly to that communication failure we saw with Governor Norman. Clarity and consistency in communication. Basically apply that idea of institutional transparency to your own life.
Exactly. Learn to speak the truth. But the key is enough, accurately, and timely. This is so crucial for managing relationships, teams, everything. Transparency doesn't mean blurting out absolutely everything that can be just reckless. It means telling people precisely what they need to know to maintain trust. That way you avoid those sudden shocks that cause panic, internally or externally.
Mm.
And consistency. That builds trust like compound interest over time.
And the final one, practice 4, building elastic teams or families. We saw how deadly rigidity was back in 1931, so we need to create these elastic institutions in our own circles: family, work teams, friendships.
Right. It means having clear principles. That's the discipline part. But also having open exits. Adaptability. That's the flexibility. Teams and families need to feel psychologically safe. People should be able to raise worries without fearing they'll get shot down. And here's a really key bit, maybe the most practical. Practice the bad scenarios before they happen. That's real preventative wisdom. Toranat Fongoa. Talk about financial stress before it hits. Discuss health crisis plans. Plan for unexpected losses. If you game out the bad stuff beforehand, it loses a lot of its power to cause a complete emotional meltdown when or if it actually happens.
So mastering your life, the sources seem to argue, really starts with mastering the monetary policy of your own soul.
Yeah, I think the Great Depression serves as this incredibly stark mirror. It reflects these timeless truths. Civilization, fundamentally, stands on the shoulders of trust. And managing that trust, it's always, always a human, emotional job. So when the invisible empire trembles, whether it's global finance or just your own life, our job is to shore up that trust through knowledge, through virtue, through these small, deliberate daily actions. If each person runs their own internal trust bank, effectively, applying that elasticity and caution in the right measure, then society as a whole becomes less fragile, less vulnerable to these storms.
We can't stop the economic sea from changing color, right? Shifting from calm blue to stormy gray. But we can learn how to sail better in those unpredictable waves. When one person gets aware of these dynamics, the psychology, the structure, the fear, the resilience, their circle gets protected. When lots of people become aware and start applying these ideas personally, well, maybe you start restoring a whole ecosystem of trust. So you've been listening not just to a history lesson, but hopefully a kind of map for action right here, right now.